Let's begin. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across my mahogany dining table as I watched my family gather for what I knew would be our last dinner together, though they had no idea. At 59, I'd learned that some moments crystallize into memory with perfect, painful clarity. This would be one of them. You see, beautiful souls, I had built this life brick by brick, dollar by dollar, decision by decision. The villa around us wasn't inherited. It was earned through 23 years of climbing corporate ladders and heels, of proving myself in boardrooms full of men who thought I belonged at home, of working twice as hard for half the recognition. Every marble tile beneath our feet, every piece of art on these walls, every thread of silk in my dress, I had paid for it all with my blood, sweat, and unwavering determination. I smoothed my black silk dress and touched the pearl necklace at my throat, my grandmother's pearls, worn for courage on the hardest days. Tonight qualified. Each pearl held decades of family history, passed down from women who had faced their own battles with grace and steel. I would need both tonight. My son David arrived first, his tired eyes brightening when he saw me. "Mom, you look beautiful as always." He kissed my cheek, and I caught a whiff of his cologne mixed with stress sweat. The marketing firm had been demanding more of him lately, and I could see the exhaustion etched around his eyes. He was 31 now, successful in his own right, but still my baby boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Then she walked in. Madison Sinclair Harlow swept through my front door like she owned it, her designer heels clicking against the marble I'd chosen and paid for myself. 28 years old, blonde highlights catching the light, lips pursed in that permanent expression of dissatisfaction that had become her signature. She carried herself with the entitled confidence of someone who had never earned anything but expected everything. From the moment David introduced her 2 years ago, I'd sensed something predatory beneath her Instagram-perfect smile. Call it mother's intuition, call it hard-earned wisdom, but I knew a gold digger when I saw one. Madison had quit her job as a boutique sales associate the moment their engagement was announced, claiming that supporting David's career was more important than any job. What she meant was that playing house in my villa while planning how to inherit it was more appealing than actual work. "Elena," she said, not bothering with warmth. "Lovely to see you." I smiled serenely. "Madison, darling. You look, well." She didn't catch the subtle slight, too busy examining my home with those calculating eyes. I watched her mental arithmetic, the imported Italian marble, the hand-carved banister, the oil paintings I'd collected over decades of hard work. In her mind, it was all hers already. She'd made that clear during their engagement party when she'd asked me, in front of guests, whether I'd updated my will recently. The audacity had been breathtaking. Dinner began cordially enough. The housekeeper, Mrs. Williams, bless her soul, had outdone herself with the roasted duck and wine reduction. She'd been with me for 8 years, ever since I could finally afford the luxury of household help, and she understood the importance of this evening even if she didn't know why. David made pleasant conversation about his work. Madison contributed the occasional social media anecdote about influencer friends she'd never actually met, and I played the gracious hostess while studying every micro-expression on my daughter-in-law's face. I'd learned to read people during decades of high-stakes negotiations. Madison's tells were obvious once you knew what to look for. The way her eyes lit up when money was mentioned, how she steered every conversation toward material possessions, the calculating pause before she answered any question about her feelings for David. She loved his potential net worth, not his character. Then came my announcement. "I have some news to share," I said, setting down my wine glass with deliberate care. "I've decided to leave Morrison and Associates." David's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Leave? But Mom, you love that firm. You built their entire international division." "Health reasons," I said simply. The doctor thinks the stress isn't good for my heart. I watched Madison's face transform. Interest flickered in her eyes, the kind of predatory attention a shark shows when it smells blood in the water. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. A sick, unemployed older woman meant accelerated inheritance timelines in her twisted logic. "So you're unemployed again?" she said, her voice carrying just enough sweetness to mask the venom. The word, again, was particularly calculated, designed to make me sound like a chronic failure despite my decades of success. How does it feel to be an old loser? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to hold its breath. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and I felt something inside me shift and crystallize. In that moment, Madison had handed me the keys to her own destruction, though she was too arrogant and stupid to realize it. David's face went white with shock and embarrassment. "Madison, what the hell?" But I smiled. Calm, composed, devastatingly serene. This was the smile that had closed billion-dollar deals and made grown men in boardrooms step back in fear, though they never understood why. "I don't know," I said, my voice carrying the refined steel that had made corporate executives tremble. Each word was measured, precise, deadly. "But I do know how good it feels knowing you won't be living in my villa anymore. Without rent." Madison's face drained of color so quickly I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, and her hands began to tremble slightly. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely afraid.
"Good. She should be."
What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice cracking. I stood gracefully, my pearls catching the chandelier light, every movement deliberate and controlled. In that moment, I felt the power of every woman who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or insulted because of her age. Madison had awakened something ancient and unstoppable. "Exactly what I said, darling. Dinner was lovely. Thank you both for coming." And with that, I walked out of my own dining room, leaving them in stunned silence. Behind me, I heard David's sharp intake of breath and Madison's panicked whisper. "What did she mean? David, what did she mean? You have to fix this."
But there would be no fixing this.
Madison had made her choice when she decided to humiliate me in my own home. Now she would live with the consequences. I climbed the curved staircase to my bedroom, my hand trailing along the banister I'd chosen 15 years ago when I bought this villa with my own money, my own success, my own unbreakable will. Every step reminded me of how far I'd come from that frightened young widow with a 10-year-old son and a mountain of bills. In the privacy of my room, I finally let myself feel the full weight of her words. Old loser. The phrase echoed in my mind, each syllable a fresh cut. I sat at my vanity, staring at my reflection, still beautiful, still elegant, but marked now by the years Madison thought made me worthless. But as I looked deeper into my own eyes, I saw something Madison had failed to recognize: the accumulated wisdom of nearly 6 decades, the quiet strength of a woman who had survived loss and betrayal, the sophisticated patience of someone who knew that the best revenge was always served cold. 59 years of building, achieving, surviving. A successful career that I'd fought for when women weren't welcome in corporate boardrooms. A son I'd raised alone after my husband's death, working 16-hour days while helping with homework at midnight. This villa, this life, this legacy, all mine. And this spoiled child thought she could reduce me to nothing with 2 careless words. I opened my jewelry box and removed my grandmother's rings, the ones I'd worn through every major decision of my life. Tomorrow, I would visit my lawyer. Tonight, I would plan the most exquisite revenge. Outside my window, the city lights twinkled like stars, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the intoxicating thrill of a challenge worthy of my intelligence. Madison had no idea what she'd just unleashed. Beautiful souls, if this story is resonating with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more empowering stories. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. Now, let's continue with Elena's story, because what happens next will absolutely shock you. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay in my king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling I'd had hand-painted by Italian artisans, remembering. 23 years old, fresh from university, walking into Morrison and Associates in my only good suit and my grandmother's pearls. The receptionist had looked me up and down and asked if I was there for the secretary position. No, I'd said, lifting my chin. I'm here for the junior analyst role. The laughter that followed still echoed sometimes. But I'd gotten that job. And then the next one. And the next. When James died, my darling husband, taken too soon by cancer. I was 35 with a 10-year-old son and a mortgage that felt insurmountable. David had cried for weeks, and I'd held him every night while secretly wondering how we'd survive. Morrison and Associates became my lifeline. I threw myself into work with desperate intensity, climbing each rung with bloody knuckles and sheer determination. International markets, corporate acquisitions, billion-dollar deals, I mastered them all. By 40, I was running their European division. By 50, I was the youngest senior partner in the firm's history. The villa came when I was 44, bought with my own bonus money after landing the Yamamoto merger. David had met Madison 3 years ago at some gallery opening. She was everything I'd never been. Young, conventionally pretty in that Instagram way, and utterly without ambition beyond marrying well. She'd quit her job as a boutique sales associate the day after their engagement, claiming David's career was enough for both of them. I'd bitten my tongue and smiled. The morning sun filtered through my silk curtains as I rose, showered, and selected my armor for the day. A charcoal Armani suit and the pearl earrings James had given me for our 10th anniversary. In the mirror, I saw exactly what I was, a formidable woman who'd earned every thread, every pearl, every square foot of marble beneath her feet. Madison saw an old loser. Let her. I drove my Mercedes to the law offices of Brennan and Associates, where I'd been a client for 15 years. Marcus Brennan rose when I entered, his silver hair immaculate as always. Elena, what a pleasant surprise. Though you look determined. Should I be concerned? I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, crossing my legs with practiced elegance. I need to revise my will. His eyebrows rose. Nothing serious, I hope? You're the picture of health. Preventative measures, I said smoothly. I want to make some significant changes to the inheritance structure. For the next 2 hours, we discussed my estate in detail. The villa, worth $3 million. The stock portfolio, carefully built over decades. The jewelry collection, including pieces that were family heirlooms. The art, the furniture, the wine cellar James and I had lovingly curated. And Madison? Marcus asked delicately. I smiled. Madison gets exactly what she deserves. He made notes without judgment. Lawyers are wonderful that way. When we finished, I felt lighter than I had in years. One more thing, I said as I prepared to leave. Complete confidentiality on this revision. Not even David is to know. Of course. When would you like the changes to take effect? Immediately. That afternoon, I stopped by my favorite florist and ordered fresh peonies for the house. Life felt precious suddenly, each moment sharp and clear. I had work to do. At home, I found Madison in my kitchen, going through my mail. She looked up with fake brightness when I entered. I was just looking through my personal correspondence. I kept my voice light, curious rather than accusatory. She flushed. I was sorting it for you. David mentioned you've been tired lately. Interesting. She was already making moves, positioning herself as the helpful daughter-in-law stepping in for the failing matriarch. I filed that observation away. How thoughtful, though unnecessary. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Something flickered in her eyes, frustration, perhaps disappointment that I wasn't playing the role she'd cast for me. Of course, she said quickly. I just wanted to help. I nodded graciously and began preparing tea, aware of her watching my every movement. She was cataloging, I realized, studying my routines, my habits, my weaknesses. Madison, I said as I set the kettle on the stove, may I ask you something? Certainly. Last night, at dinner. Did you mean what you said? She had the grace to look uncomfortable. I was upset about something from earlier. I shouldn't have. No need to apologize. I cut her off gently. I was simply curious about your perspective. You see me as old, as a loser. I find that fascinating. The silence stretched between us. She was trying to gauge whether this was a trap or an opportunity. I didn't mean, oh, but you did. I turned to face her fully. And that's perfectly all right. People see what they choose to see. I poured the tea into my grandmother's china, the set Madison had once admired, asking if it would be hers someday. How naive I'd been to think she was simply appreciating beauty. What do you see when you look at me, Madison? She shifted uncomfortably. I see. David's mother. A woman who's accomplished a great deal. Diplomatic, I murmured, but not truthful. I handed her the teacup, noting how she accepted it greedily, already seeing herself as lady of this manor. You see a relic, I continued conversationally. An obstacle between you and what you believe should be yours. A tired old woman whose time has passed. She started to protest, but I held up a hand. Please. Honesty is refreshing. And you're not entirely wrong. I am tired. 23 years of climbing mountains that men told me were impossible to scale. It does exhaust a person. Madison relaxed slightly, thinking she'd won something. The question is, I said, sipping my tea, what happens when tired old women decide they have nothing left to lose? The color drained from her face again, just as it had the night before. I was beginning to enjoy that look. I should go, she whispered. Yes, I agreed pleasantly. You should. After she left, I sat in my sunroom surrounded by the peonies, planning the most beautiful destruction imaginable. The beauty of patrician revenge lies in its subtlety. Madison expected dramatics, screaming matches, threats, melodrama. Instead, I gave her polite smiles and careful silence while systematically dismantling her future. 3 weeks after our dinner confrontation, I hosted my monthly book club meeting. 8 influential women from the city's social elite, all of whom had known me for years. Madison had been begging David to include her in these gatherings, seeing them as her entry point into the upper echelons of society she so desperately craved. I'd finally agreed. Ladies, I'd like you to meet David's wife, Madison, I said as she arrived fashionably late in a dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary, purchased, no doubt, with David's credit card. She preened under their polite attention, not noticing the subtle coolness in their responses. These women were experts at social warfare. They could smell desperation from across a room. Madison, dear, said Virginia Ashford, wife of the city's most prominent surgeon, Elena tells us you're quite the influencer. Madison brightened. Oh, well, I do have a substantial following on Instagram. Fashion, lifestyle, that sort of thing. How modern, murmured Catherine Mills, though her tone suggested she found nothing admirable about modernity. I watched Madison navigate the conversation like a ship heading toward rocks, completely unaware of the danger. She boasted about expensive purchases, name-dropped celebrities she'd never met, and made several casual references to when I inherit Elena's house. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Inherit? Virginia asked sweetly. How presumptuous of her to assume. Don't you think, Elena? I smiled mysteriously. Young people often make assumptions about the future. It's rather charming in its way. By the time Madison left, sensing, finally, that she'd made some undefined error, the damage was complete. These women controlled guest lists, charity boards, and social invitations throughout the city. With a few carefully placed phrases, I'd ensured Madison would find every important door closed to her. But that was just the beginning. David visited 3 days later, his face creased with worry. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. We sat in my library, surrounded by the books I'd collected over decades. First editions, signed copies, literary treasures that would be worth a fortune to the right buyer. Of course, darling. What's troubling you? Your will. Madison mentioned. She's worried that you might be angry with her. About what she said at dinner. I closed my book, a biography of Catherine the Great, rather fitting, and gave him my full attention. Am I supposed to be happy that your wife called me an old loser in my own home? David flinched. No, of course not. She was wrong, and I told her so. But, Mom, you're not. You wouldn't actually cut her out, would you? The hope in his eyes nearly broke my heart. My sweet boy, caught between loyalty to his mother and devotion to his wife. He had no idea what kind of woman he'd married. David, I said carefully, do you love her?
Yes.
More than anything. And do you believe she loves you? Of course. I nodded slowly. Then you have nothing to worry about. A woman who truly loves my son would never treat me with such disrespect. It wasn't a lie, technically. It was a logical statement that let him hear whatever he needed to hear while committing me to nothing. He relaxed visibly. So you won't change anything? I will do what I think is best for our family's future. Another non-answer that satisfied him completely. After he left, I returned to my biography of Catherine the Great, taking notes on the art of patient, methodical revenge. That weekend, Madison made her next mistake. I found her in my bedroom, going through my jewelry box. She jumped when I entered, clutching my grandmother's sapphire bracelet. David said I could borrow something for tonight's dinner. Did he? I kept my voice mild, curious. And what dinner is that? She scrambled for a plausible lie. The Ashfords. Virginia invited us. I smiled. Virginia Ashford hadn't spoken to Madison since the book club meeting. I knew because Virginia had called to thank me for exposing that little gold digger before she could sink her claws any deeper into decent society. How lovely, I said. Though I believe you're mistaken about the bracelet. That particular piece was my grandmother's engagement present from my grandfather. It's rather sentimental. Madison's face went sullen. I'm family now, too. Are you? I moved past her to my dressing table, beginning my evening skincare routine as though she wasn't there. Family doesn't typically rifle through personal belongings without permission. I asked David. You lied about dinner plans and rifled through my jewelry while you thought I was out. I met her eyes in the mirror. What would you call that behavior? She set the bracelet down with shaking hands. I should go. Yes, you should. But she stopped at the doorway, turning back with something like desperation in her eyes. Elena, I know we got off on the wrong foot, but I love David so much, and I want us to be a real family. Can't we start over? For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Of course, dear. Family is everything. She left with a relieved smile, thinking she'd won reprieve. She had no idea I was simply giving her enough rope to hang herself with. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to David's employer, recommending a bright young analyst I'd mentored for a position that would require extensive travel. The second was to my banker, making certain arrangements regarding David's trust fund access. The third was to a private investigator I'd used for corporate background checks. If Madison wanted to play games with the wrong woman, I'd make sure I knew every secret she'd ever kept. By afternoon, I had the first report. Madison's boutique job had ended with her termination for theft, jewelry that had mysteriously gone missing from inventory. Her previous boyfriend, a wealthy widower, had broken their engagement after discovering she'd been forging his signature on checks. My daughter-in-law, it seemed, had quite the talent for deception. I filed the report in my safe, next to my revised will. 2 pieces of insurance for the war Madison had foolishly declared on me. That evening, I stood in my garden watching the sunset paint my villa in shades of gold and rose. 23 years I'd spent building this life, this legacy, this sanctuary. Madison thought she could walk in and take it with a smile and a marriage certificate. She was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. 2 months passed like the quiet before a hurricane. Madison had settled into a routine of false sweetness and careful observation, clearly believing she'd successfully navigated the crisis of our dinner confrontation. She volunteered to help with household management, inserted herself into conversations with repairmen and service providers, and made subtle suggestions about updating my decor. I let her play house while building my case. The private investigators' reports arrived weekly, each one adding another layer to Madison's portrait. Credit card debt hidden from David. A pattern of targeting older, wealthy men before my son. A restraining order filed by her previous employer, not just terminated for theft, but caught on security cameras systematically stealing from customers' purses left in changing rooms. She was a predator who'd identified David as her path to permanent financial security. The inheritance she expected from me wasn't just desired. It was essential to her survival, which made what I was about to do infinitely more satisfying. Elena, could I ask you for a small favor? Madison approached me one Tuesday afternoon as I tended my rose garden. She'd taken to calling me by my first name instead of any familial title, a small rebellion that revealed her true feelings about our relationship. Of course, dear. I didn't look up from pruning my prize crimson glories. David's been working such long hours lately, and I've been thinking maybe we should take that European vacation we've been planning. But with the expenses of the wedding and everything. She let the sentence hang, waiting for me to offer financial assistance. I'd been expecting this request for weeks. A vacation sounds lovely. Travel is so important for young couples. The silence stretched. I continued pruning, aware of her growing frustration. The thing is, we're a bit tight on funds right now. How unfortunate. I straightened, meeting her eyes with polite sympathy. Have you considered a more budget-friendly destination? I hear there are some lovely bed and breakfasts in the mountains. Her smile went rigid. I was hoping, since you're family and you've been so generous in the past, have I? I tilted my head thoughtfully. I can't recall being particularly generous with you, Madison. Perhaps you're thinking of someone else. Color rose in her cheeks. You let us live here rent-free. I let my son live in his childhood home. You're simply included in that arrangement. The distinction hit its mark. She opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. Of course, she said stiffly. I misspoke. Think nothing of it. I returned to my roses. Though Madison, since you brought up finances, I have been concerned about David's spending lately. These credit card bills seem quite high for a young man with his salary. She went very still. I don't know what you mean. The statements that come to this address, since he hasn't updated his billing information. Quite a lot of charges at high-end boutiques. And that jewelry store, what was it, Cartier? A rather expensive purchase for someone who's tight on funds. I looked up in time to see panic flash across her features before she controlled it. David likes to spoil me. How sweet. Though I do hope you're being mindful of his future. Building a marriage on financial strain can be so destructive. She mumbled something about being careful and fled into the house. I smiled, clipping another perfect bloom for my vase. The web was tightening nicely. That evening, David called with news that made my heart sing, though I was careful to keep my voice neutral. Mom, I have incredible news. The firm offered me the Thompson account, the one you recommended me for. It means traveling to their London office for 6 months, maybe longer. Darling, that's wonderful. What an opportunity. The thing is, Madison can't come with me. Her visa situation is complicated, and honestly, the housing they're providing is just a small flat. She'd be miserable. So she'll stay here? Would that be all right? I know things have been tense between you two. I paused just long enough to sound reluctant. If it helps your career, of course, she can stay. We'll find a way to get along. You're the best, Mom. I love you. I love you too, darling. When do you leave? 3 weeks.
Perfect.
Absolutely perfect. After we hung up, I sat in my library savoring the exquisite symmetry of it all. Madison had married David for financial security, but her greed and impatience were about to cost her everything. 6 months alone with me, in my house, under my rules, while her husband was an ocean away. She had no idea what was coming. 3 days later, I received the most interesting phone call of my life. Ms. Harlow? This is Detective Sarah Murphy with the Metro Police Department. I was hoping to ask you a few questions about Madison Sinclair. My heart rate didn't change. Years of high-stakes negotiations had taught me perfect emotional control. Madison is my daughter-in-law. Is everything all right? We're investigating a case of identity theft and credit card fraud. Her name has come up in connection with several victims. I was wondering if you could come in to discuss her access to your personal information. Identity theft. I let appropriate concern color my voice. Detective, I think we should definitely speak. When would be convenient for you? We arranged to meet the following afternoon. As I hung up, I realized the universe was gift-wrapping Madison's destruction for me. That night, I found her going through my mail again, specifically my bank statements and investment reports. This time, I didn't announce my presence. Instead, I took photos with my phone as she photographed my account numbers with hers. Identity theft, indeed. I cleared my throat softly, and she spun around like a guilty child caught stealing cookies.
Elena.
I was just organizing. Madison, I said gently, we need to talk. For the next hour, I performed the greatest acting of my life. I played the concerned mother-in-law, the trusting victim, the woman who'd suspected something was wrong but couldn't quite put her finger on it. I let her spin elaborate lies about why she needed my account information to help manage household expenses while David's away, and I pretended to believe every word. When she finally went to bed, I called Detective Murphy. I have some information that might interest you, I said quietly. And I'm afraid my daughter-in-law may be in more trouble than either of us realized. The trap was set. Madison had 3 weeks of freedom left, though she didn't know it. I spent those weeks being the picture of gracious cooperation, helping her plan David's going-away party, discussing household arrangements for his absence, even offering to take her shopping for appropriate clothes for a corporate wife. She preened under the attention, clearly believing she'd successfully manipulated me into acceptance. At David's farewell party, she played the devoted wife beautifully, accepting congratulations and sympathy for the coming separation. Elena's been so understanding, she told our guests, like the mother I never had. I smiled warmly and squeezed her hand. Family takes care of family. After David left for London, Madison settled into my villa like a parasite finding the perfect host. She rearranged furniture, invited friends over without asking, and treated my home like her personal playground. I let her. Each transgression was another nail in her coffin. The arrest came on a Tuesday morning. I was in my garden when the police cars arrived, their lights reflecting off my windows like fireworks. Madison came running out, her hair still in curlers, panic written across her face. "Elena, there are police here. What's happening?" I set down my watering can and walked calmly toward the officers. Detective Murphy stepped forward, her expression professional but not unkind. "Madison Sinclair, you're under arrest for identity theft, credit card fraud, and grand larceny." The sound Madison made wasn't quite human, a keening wail of pure desperation. She turned to me, mascara streaming down her cheeks. "Elena, tell them they're wrong. Tell them I would never." I met her eyes with perfect composure. "I'm sorry, Madison. I had to tell them the truth." Understanding dawned in her face, followed by rage, so pure it was almost beautiful. "You did this," she hissed. "You set me up." "No, darling," I said softly. "You set yourself up. I simply documented the evidence." As they led her away in handcuffs, she screamed back at me, "David will never forgive you for this. Never." I stood in my doorway, elegant and composed, watching until the police cars disappeared. Then I went inside, poured myself a glass of wine, and called my son. "David, darling, I have some rather difficult news to share with you." The conversation with David was heartbreaking and necessary. He flew back from London within 24 hours, his face gaunt with shock and betrayal. I met him at the airport, and the drive home passed in terrible silence. In my library, surrounded by the books that had been my companions through every crisis of my life, I presented him with everything: the private investigators' reports, the police evidence, the photographs I'd taken of Madison rifling through my financial documents. "Mom," his voice broke. "How long did you know?" I suspected from the beginning that she wasn't what she seemed. But I hoped I was wrong. For your sake, I desperately hoped I was wrong. He buried his face in his hands. "The charges, they're saying she stole from at least 6 other people. An elderly man lost his life savings because of her." "I know, darling. I'm so sorry. But you set her up. You let her dig through your things knowing she'd take the bait." I chose my words carefully. I gave her opportunities to prove me wrong. Instead, she proved my worst fears correct. He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Did you ever love her? Even a little?" "I loved what she meant to you. But David, the woman you married, was a fiction. A role she played to access our family's wealth." We talked through the night. He raged. He wept. He questioned everything about his marriage. I held him as I had when he was a child, this son I'd raised alone, this man who'd been deceived by a master manipulator. "What happens now?" he asked as dawn broke over my garden. "Now you heal, and you learn to trust your instincts again. And eventually, when you're ready, you find someone who loves you for who you are, not what you can provide." He stayed with me for 2 weeks while filing for divorce and sorting through the wreckage of his marriage. Madison's lawyer tried to negotiate from prison. She wanted a settlement, alimony, anything to avoid complete ruin. David's response was swift and merciless. She would get nothing beyond what the law required, which was virtually nothing since they'd signed a prenuptial agreement that voided all claims in case of criminal conviction. Madison's mother called me once, screaming about how I'd ruined her daughter's life. I listened politely until she exhausted herself, then said simply, "Your daughter ruined her own life. I merely ensured she couldn't destroy anyone else's in the process." The trial was a media sensation. Madison had targeted not just elderly victims, but had also defrauded several small businesses and even a children's charity. The evidence was overwhelming, and her defense crumbled when the prosecution presented recordings of her bragging to friends about playing the long game with rich old fools. I attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row wearing my pearls and my most elegant suits. Madison's eyes found mine repeatedly, filled with hatred so pure it was almost admirable in its intensity. When the guilty verdict was read, she collapsed. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in prison, with restitution orders that would keep her in debt for decades even after her release. As the bailiff led her away, she turned back one final time. "You haven't won," she screamed at me. "David will never forgive you. You'll die alone." I smiled serenely and said nothing. She was wrong, of course. David understood now that I'd saved him from a lifetime of manipulation and eventual betrayal. Our relationship had emerged stronger than ever. But more than that, I had won something far more valuable than mere revenge. With Madison out of our lives permanently, I made an unexpected decision. I returned to work. Not to Morrison and Associates. That chapter of my life was closed. Instead, I started my own consulting firm, specializing in helping companies identify and prevent internal fraud. My experience with Madison, combined with decades of corporate expertise, made me uniquely qualified for the work. Phoenix Consulting. I named it, both for the obvious symbolism and because I liked the idea of rising from the ashes of what others assumed was my decline. Within 6 months, I had 12 clients and a waiting list. My reputation for spotting deception and protecting vulnerable assets made me invaluable in a world where trust had become a luxury few could afford. David returned to London to finish his assignment, but now our phone calls were filled with excitement rather than worry. He was thriving professionally, and more importantly, he was learning to trust his judgment again. "Mom, I met someone," he told me during one of our weekly conversations. "Oh." I set down my teacup, intrigued. "Her name is Sarah. She's a librarian at the British Museum. Brilliant, kind, completely unimpressed by money or status. She made me pay for my own coffee on our first date." I laughed. "I like her already. She reminds me of you, actually. Strong, independent, no patience for nonsense." The highest compliment he could have given. Sarah visited during Christmas, and I knew immediately that this was the woman my son had been waiting for his entire life. She admired my book collection without calculating its value, helped with dinner preparation despite my protests that she was a guest, and listened with genuine interest when I told stories about building my career. "David's lucky to have you as a mother," she told me as we walked through my garden. "He talks about you constantly, how you taught him to be independent, to value character over appearances, to never give up on his dreams. He turned out rather well, didn't he? He's the finest man I've ever known." They announced their engagement the following summer. As I watched Sarah's face when David proposed, radiant with love rather than calculation, I felt something I'd thought Madison had destroyed: hope for my family's future. The wedding was small, elegant, and genuine. Sarah wore her grandmother's dress and my mother's pearl necklace. Their vows spoke of partnership, respect, and shared dreams rather than material promises. Madison, meanwhile, had been denied parole after attacking another prisoner who'd made comments about rich bitches who got what they deserved. The additional assault charges would keep her behind bars for at least another 5 years. I felt no satisfaction in her continued suffering, only relief that she was too far removed from our lives to cause any further damage. My business continued to flourish. I'd found my true calling in protecting others from predators like Madison, and the work filled me with purpose I'd never experienced in traditional corporate consulting. "You seem different," Sarah observed during one of their visits home. "Lighter. More yourself, if that makes sense." It made perfect sense. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop, watching for signs that someone was using me or planning to take what I'd built. I was simply living, creating, contributing to the world in meaningful ways. 3 years after Madison's conviction, I made a discovery that crystallized everything I'd learned about revenge, justice, and the power of living well. I was reviewing files for a new client when I came across a familiar name, Victoria Sinclair, Madison's mother. She'd been arrested for running an elaborate insurance fraud scheme, bilking elderly victims out of their life savings through fake medical equipment sales. The apple, it seemed, hadn't fallen far from the tree. But what struck me wasn't the confirmation of Madison's corrupt upbringing. It was my own complete lack of surprise or satisfaction. I felt nothing but mild professional interest and a note to avoid this family entirely in future background checks. Madison had once consumed my thoughts, my energy, my careful planning. Now she was simply irrelevant, a cautionary tale I occasionally shared with clients, stripped of any emotional power over my life. That evening, I stood in my library, holding a letter that had arrived that morning. It was from Madison herself, writing from prison. Elena, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to tell you something. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened, and I understand now that you were protecting your family. I was angry for so long, but I see now that I brought everything on myself. I heard about David's new marriage from his cousin, who visited me last month. She sounds like a good woman. I'm glad he found someone who will love him the way he deserves. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I'm getting help in here. Therapy, education programs, learning to be a better person. When I get out, I'm going to start over completely. No more schemes, no more lies. Just honest work and maybe finding someone who can love the real me, whoever that turns out to be. You were right about everything. I hope someday David can remember the good times we had without too much pain. Madison. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. Not out of vindictiveness, but simply because it belonged to a chapter of my life that was finished. Madison's redemption, if genuine, was between her and whatever future she could build. It had nothing to do with me. The real victory wasn't her imprisonment or downfall. It was the life I'd built after removing her toxicity from our family. Phoenix Consulting had grown into a nationally recognized firm. David and Sarah had bought their own home and were talking about children. I had work that mattered, relationships built on genuine affection, and the deep satisfaction of a life lived on my own terms. At 62, I was more vital and engaged than I'd been in decades. The woman Madison had dismissed as an old loser had created something beautiful from the ashes of that insult. My dear sisters, if this story is touching your heart, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel. Remember, beautiful souls, that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are actually redirecting us toward our greatest victories. Your pain has purpose, and your comeback story is waiting to be written. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our empowering content, and let's continue with Elena's inspiring journey. The call came on a Tuesday morning in spring, 4 years after Madison's conviction. I was in my office reviewing proposals when my assistant knocked. Mrs. Harlow? There's a Detective Murphy on line 2. She says it's about the Sinclair case. I picked up with mild curiosity, assuming it was a routine follow-up. Elena, I wanted to give you a heads up, Detective Murphy said without preamble. Madison Sinclair was released early for good behavior. She got out yesterday. I felt nothing, no fear, no anger, no satisfaction. Just a mild acknowledgement of information.
I see.
Thank you for letting me know. She's not allowed to contact you or your family as part of her parole conditions, but I wanted you to be aware. Some victims get nervous when their perpetrators are released. I appreciate the courtesy, Detective, but I'm not concerned. And I truly wasn't. Madison was a chapter in a book I'd already finished writing. 3 weeks later, I was leaving a client meeting when I saw her. She was standing across the street from my office building, thinner than I remembered, her blonde hair now brown and pulled back severely. Our eyes met through the traffic, and for a moment, time stopped. She raised one hand in what might have been a greeting or an acknowledgement, then turned and walked away. I watched her disappear into the crowd, noting that she moved differently now, less predatory confidence, more careful humility. I went back to my office and continued with my day. That evening, Sarah called with news that made me smile. "Elena, we wanted you to hear this from us first. We're pregnant." "Oh, darling, how wonderful." David's over the moon. He's already talking about converting the spare room into a nursery. "When are you due?" "December. We're hoping you'll be very involved. This baby is going to need a strong grandmother's influence." I felt tears of joy gathering. Nothing could keep me away. The pregnancy progressed beautifully. I attended every appointment I could, helped design the nursery, and reveled in watching my son transform into an expectant father. He was tender with Sarah, protective without being controlling, excited without being overwhelming. He'd learned the difference between love and possession, between devotion and manipulation. Madison's betrayal, painful as it had been, had taught him invaluable lessons about recognizing authentic emotion. "Mom," he said one afternoon as we assembled a crib together, "I need to thank you." "For what, darling?" "For seeing through Madison when I couldn't. For protecting me even when I didn't want to be protected. I was so angry at first, but now you understand that sometimes love requires difficult choices." "Exactly. If you hadn't stopped her, she would have destroyed our family from the inside out. Sarah would never have felt safe with her around, and I would have been trapped in a marriage built on lies." I handed him a screw for the crib rail. "You would have figured it out eventually. You're stronger than you realize." "Maybe. But you gave me the chance to find real love instead of wasting years on fake devotion." Emma Grace was born on December 15th, weighing 7 pounds and 4 ounces of pure perfection. I held my granddaughter for the first time in the hospital room, surrounded by flowers and the soft glow of new life, and felt my heart expand in ways I'd forgotten were possible. "Look at those eyes," Sarah whispered. "She's already studying everything." "Intelligent women run in this family," I murmured, gently stroking Emma's tiny hand. David leaned over us both, his face radiant with exhaustion and joy. "Mom, will you be her godmother? Officially?" "I'd be honored." Over the following months, I discovered the unique joy of being a grandmother without the weight of primary responsibility. I could spoil Emma outrageously, share all my favorite stories, and hand her back to her parents when she got fussy. My villa, once a symbol of achievement and later a battleground, became a sanctuary for family gatherings. Emma took her first steps on my marble floors, said her first word, "Nana," in my garden, and filled every room with laughter I'd never dared hope to hear again. On Emma's first birthday, we threw a party that brought together 3 generations of strong women. Sarah's mother, a retired teacher with fierce intelligence. Sarah herself, juggling motherhood and her career with grace. Me, now 64 and at the height of my professional influence. And tiny Emma, already showing signs of the determination that marked our lineage. "Look what we built," I said to Sarah as we watched David chase Emma around the garden while she shrieked with delight. "You built this," she corrected gently. "The foundation, the strength, the wisdom to protect what matters. We're all just lucky enough to be part of it." That evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my library with a cup of tea and reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Madison's cruel words, "old loser," had been intended to diminish me, to make me question my worth and relevance. Instead, They had awakened something fierce and unstoppable. They had forced me to examine my life, my priorities, my legacy. They had pushed me to become more than I'd ever been before. I thought about Madison sometimes, wondering if she'd truly changed or if prison had simply taught her better concealment techniques. But these thoughts held no power over me. She was a ghost from a different lifetime, irrelevant to the woman I'd become. 5 years had passed since Madison's release, when the final piece of our story fell into place. I was at my office when my assistant buzzed in with an unusual request. "Mrs. Harlow? There's a woman here who says she used to know your family. She won't give her name, but she's asking if she could speak with you for just a few minutes." Instinct told me who it was before I answered. "Send her in." Madison entered my office like a shadow of her former self. The predatory confidence was gone, replaced by something that might have been genuine humility. She wore simple clothes, no jewelry, and her hair was silver-streaked, though she couldn't be more than 35.
Hello,
Madison. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Please sit." She perched on the edge of the chair, as though ready to flee at any moment. "I know I'm not supposed to contact you. This violates my parole conditions, and I'll probably go back to prison for it." "Then why take the risk?" "Because I needed to say something, and I couldn't live with myself if I didn't." I waited, giving her space to gather her thoughts. "I saw the article about your consulting firm in Forbes, about how you've helped recover millions in stolen assets and prevented dozens of fraudulent schemes. I read about your family, too, David's promotion, his wife, your granddaughter. And I realized something I should have understood years ago. You weren't my enemy. You were protecting everything good and real in the world from people like me." Her voice cracked slightly. "I spent 5 years in prison hating you, planning what I'd say when I got out, how I'd prove you were wrong about me. But seeing how beautiful your life became after I was gone, I understand now that you were never the villain in this story." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "What do you want, Madison?" "Nothing. That's the point. I don't want anything from you or your family ever again. I just needed you to know that I understand what I was, and I'm grateful you stopped me before I could do worse damage." "And what are you now?" She smiled, and for the first time since I'd known her, it looked genuine. "I'm a woman starting over at 35 with nothing but a prison record and a determination to earn an honest living. I work at a nonprofit that helps women re-enter society after incarceration. I make minimum wage. I live in a studio apartment, and I've never been happier." "Because it's real." "Because it's real," she agreed. "Everything before was a performance, even to myself. I thought happiness meant having what other people had built. I never understood that it meant building something yourself." We sat in silence for a moment. Outside my window, the city hummed with life and possibility. "There's something else," she said quietly. "I need to apologize for what I called you that night at dinner. Old loser. It was cruel and ignorant and said everything about my character and nothing about yours. You were 28 years old and threatened by a woman who'd accomplished more in her lifetime than you could imagine. I understand the impulse, even if I don't excuse it. You were never old, and you were certainly never a loser. You were a force of nature that I was too shallow to recognize." I stood up, signaling that our conversation was ending. "Madison, I hope you find peace in your new life. Genuinely." She rose as well, tears gathering in her eyes. "Thank you. For everything. Even for destroying me, because I needed to be destroyed to become someone worth saving." After she left, I sat in my office as the afternoon sun painted golden rectangles across my desk. I thought about circles closing, stories ending, and the strange ways that justice unfolds in the universe. That evening, I drove home to my villa, my sanctuary, my achievement, my legacy. David and Sarah were bringing Emma for dinner, and I needed to prepare her favorite meal. At 3 years old, she had definite opinions about food, stories, and which grandmother gave the best hugs. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw them through the window. David lifting Emma high in the air while she shrieked with laughter, Sarah watching with the serene smile of a woman who knew she was loved for exactly who she was. This was my victory. Not Madison's destruction, but this abundance of genuine love and respect. Not revenge, but the life I'd built from the ashes of her insult. I walked into my home, my refuge, my fortress, my gift to future generations, and embraced my family. At 65, I was not an old loser, but a woman who had transformed pain into purpose, betrayal into wisdom, and rage into something magnificent. The little girl who had once been afraid of not being enough had become a woman who knew her worth was immeasurable. And that, more than any revenge, was the sweetest victory of all. Dear beautiful souls, Elena's story reminds us that our greatest comebacks often begin with our deepest hurts. If this journey has moved you, please show your love by hitting that like button, subscribing to our channel, and sharing this story with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, you are never too old, never too broken, and never too late to write a new chapter of your life. Your best days aren't behind you. They're waiting for you to claim them. Until next time, keep writing your own beautiful story, because the world needs exactly what you have to offer.